12 jurors now listening to closing arguments in the Boston Marathon bombing trial. The prosecution making a dramatic final plea to jurors, and now the defense will leave the jury with its final words. Hello everyone, I'm Dan Pfeffler in New York, and joining us from Boston is ABC's Marcy Gonzalez with the latest on this. Marcy?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, the prosecution just wrapped its closing argument, calling on the jury to hold Tsarnaev accountable for what they call a cold, calculated terrorist attack.
Victims and family members somberly made their way into court this morning for the start of closing arguments. Nearly 2 years after the Boston Marathon bombings, the prosecution recapping the horrors of that day, going over parts of the heartbreaking testimony that left some jurors in tears, as well as the graphic evidence prosecutors say proves Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's role in the deadly attacks.
I think he's guilty.
The defense admits Tsarnaev was involved, but has worked to convince the mostly female jury that the now 21-year-old defendant was influenced by his older brother Tamerlan, painting the deceased sibling as the mastermind.
The defense shows the picture of Dzhokhar following Tamerlan through those pictures, showing that he was just a follower.
The defense team, led by attorney Judy Clark, who successfully fought to keep past clients, including Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, off death row, now fighting to spare Tsarnaev's life, with 17 out of the 30 charges he faces carrying the possibility of the death penalty.
And the jury could start deliberating as soon as today. If Tsarnaev is found guilty on any of those counts, the trial would then just move to the sentencing phase, which we're told could last several weeks. Dan?
All right, ABC's Marcy Gonzalez in Boston. Marcy, thank you for that. And following the trial for us from outside the courthouse in Boston is ABC's Aaron Katersky joining us now. And Aaron, those closing arguments are underway right now. The prosecution is done. What was the focus of their final push?
The prosecution made jurors relive every moment, as hard as some of those moments were for these jurors. But Al Chakravarty, the prosecutor, took them through the most gruesome photographs, the blood in the strangling limbs, the gory images that brought some of the jury to tears during trial came on the screen yet again as he tried to remind the jury just how brutal and awful the marathon attacks were. And he ended with a bit of theatrics. Music blared through a speaker and echoed around the courtroom, the same kind of jihadi music, as prosecutors called it, that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev took comfort in and put on a CD to drive around in his car with. And as that music echoed, this is how Tsarnaev saw things, and the prosecutor said that he looked at Inspire magazine, and he looked at the chaos, and he was proud of what he had done, and he thought that he was just and right because he was on a zealous mission. And then he said this is the reality, and he talked about a bloodthirsty plot that caused extensive carnage, that caused so much injury and death. And he reminded the jury about the deceased, Officer Sean Collier, who was shot 6 times, Lindsay Liu and Crystal Campbell, whose bodies were mutilated. And he ended by reminding the jury about 8-year-old Martin Richard. He quoted from Richard's father, who said, somewhat understatedly, that they were just unlucky that day. And I think he tried to bring the emotional power of a little boy being killed by a bomb that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev planted near his feet as he wrapped up his case.
Wrapping up the case for the prosecution and now onto the defense. And what do we expect that team to focus specifically on while addressing the jury?
Well, the lead defense attorney, Judy Clark, is likely to come back to the point that she made at the beginning, and that is keep your heart and your mind open. All along the way, the defense, and they were limited in what they could say here, Dan, the defense tried to show that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was not the lead actor, that he was just a pawn. And why was he following his brother? Well, later on in the trial, in the penalty phase, assuming he's found guilty, they're going to say that his grades weren't doing well, his parents had left for Russia, his brother was the self-radicalized one, and he followed the path that was set by Tamerlan Tsarnaev. The problem is that it's not going to acquit him, and the judge instructed the jury already on the federal law, which says that you don't have to find or prove that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev played a particular role, only that he played a willing role and knowingly participated in a conspiracy with his brother. And so it's a tall order for the defense, but they want the jury thinking ahead to that penalty phase when they'll ask them to spare his life.
Aaron, talk about these charges. 17, in fact, carried the death penalty as a possible punishment, right?
17 of the 30 counts carry the possible death sentence, and those counts include the use of a weapon of mass destruction, among other things. And prosecutors have broken them down to make sure the jury understands that there were a number of weapons of mass destruction used, not only the pressure cookers at the marathon finish line, but also the pipe bombs in Watertown, the pressure cooker bomb in Watertown that was thrown at police. It's believed by Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who tossed it like a hook shot as opposed to throwing like a baseball like his older brother preferred. And all of that taken together, the prosecutors are going to suggest means that Johar Tsarnaev not only committed these crimes, but did so in such a way that the death penalty is the only appropriate punishment.
Who was then in the courthouse today?
There were more victims than usual that arrived here. They come by bus and they use a separate entrance to keep them out of the fray, and more of them were here, and they packed the courtroom and an overflow room especially for victims to bear witness to the closing statements. They know that at least this phase of the trial is nearing an end. There were also a number of police officers, including some of the main actors that the public may remember. Then Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis, the commander of the state police here in Massachusetts, Colonel Timothy Albin, the Watertown Police Chief Ed DeVoe, who led his men into a street fight with the Tsarnaev brothers. He's been here for much of this. But all of these people who have been impacted, I think, serve to remind, their mere presence serves to remind the jury about the enormity of what had happened, how many resources it took to bring Tsarnaev down, and just the extent of the casualties. And the prosecutor said as much in closing arguments, reminding the jury that 4 people were killed, 17 were maimed, and more than 240 were wounded.
And the timing of this coming at rather unusual time of all of the schedules, right?
It wasn't intentional, but the anniversary of the attacks is April 15th, so we're coming up on the anniversary of the marathon attacks. And then on April 20th of this year, the next running of the Boston Marathon, when the jury could well be into the then, and that can't be lost on the jury, who all come from this half of the state, eastern Massachusetts. It can't be lost on the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, certainly the people of Boston who have been following every moment of this trial. It's everywhere on the news, in the papers. It's inescapable here, and the running of the marathon is already becoming the seminal event. While in this particular corner of the city, the jury may be well underway to determining whether Johar Tsarnaev lives or dies.
ABC's Aaron Katersky with the latest on the case. Aaron, thank you for that. And ABC's Tom Yamas will have a full recap of the story tonight on ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir on your local ABC station. You can keep up with the story in real time anytime downloading the ABC News app and starring the story for updates on the go. I'm Dan Kleffler in New York.